My uncle died alone, and it took a while before we found him. It's sad to think about it, but that's the way it was. After he missed a few days of work, his employer called his emergency contact, his ex-wife who had moved out of state, and she called my mom and the two of us went to his house. His car was still there. Mail had piled up a bit, but the door was locked and I broke in and found him in the basement, as my mom waited in the sunlit kitchen, staring anxiously down the dark mouth of the basement stairwell. The memory is painful and it's not the point of the story, or at least I don't think it is. The next few days were a blur, but at some point I went back to his house to start packing up his stuff. That's when I saw the box of tapes with my name on it. Literally, my name was written on the box in block letters. These were meant for me, maybe as a gift, maybe just for me to find. It was a box of movies, the kind he loved, sci-fi mostly, all still sealed with a few open thrillers thrown in. I flipped through them quickly. I had a lot to do. They all seemed both familiar but odd. I hadn't seen or heard of any of them. It was strange. Everything about that day seemed strange, but there was something else in the box as well. Something that caught my eye and wiped the movies from my mind. It was a note, also written to me, an apology for what he had done, what he knew we'd find in the basement, a plea for understanding too, and a warning about the movies, that he'd watched a few and that he was scared of what he found. He wrote that he couldn't destroy them and that he'd had to share them with someone, but please, don't watch any of the ones that were unopened. This line was underlined 3 times, and then at the end of the note under his signature, almost as an afterthought, he wrote that he loved me, and that he'd always wished that he'd had a son like me, and although he'd given up, he'd hoped I never would. It was a sad and confused note, written by a sad and confused man, a man I had loved in the sort of distracted way you love the family that's not your immediate family, a man none of us had loved enough, obviously. I cried then, with the note in my hand and the box of movies on my lap. Movies that must have meant something to him, and for that reason, at that moment, they meant everything to me. My uncle was strange, a quirky character that had difficulty relating to people, difficulty with relationships, and had trouble making friends. My dad had been his best friend, my mom told me that, and after my father had passed, my uncle started coming around, trying to be a replacement father, I guess, and hoping I'd be a type of replacement brother. We'd go on long walks and bike rides, and he'd talk a lot about my dad. Would even cry sometimes, even years after I was pretty much over my father's death, and he'd take me to movies. He loved movies, and I guess he made me love them too. It was a way, the way we'd connect. Sitting next to him in the theater, I felt almost like I had a dad again. Together in the theater, the two of us explored a universe of ideas, and some of my fondest childhood memories involved the cinema and featured him by my side. When a person dies the way my uncle did, fond memories are tainted. Every memory is unwillingly associated with the way their life ended, the decision they made. You have this memory that tapers into a sharp point, the end of which stabs at your heart. Does that make sense? Probably not. Not much does at a time like this. The movies he left, though, seemed both a gift from beyond and a way to enjoy his company while watching something new. So a few weeks later, I reopened the box and I pulled out one of the movies at random. One he'd opened, and presumably watched as well. It was called 9/11, and it featured a young Bruce Willis on the cover, as a fireman, presumably, and it had 2 burning towers in the background. Do you see where this is going? I paused the movie at the point where the towers came down. The scene was too eerily reminiscent of the actual event. I examined the box the movie came in and saw that the movie came out in '86. I felt my scalp start to tingle. Obviously, this movie inspired the terrorists. I googled it then to see if anyone else had shared the same opinion online, but I couldn't find any mention of the movie at all, though the box art looked similar to the art for Die Hard, which came out a few years later. I ejected the tape and popped in another. It was an early '80s sci-fi comedy called Cosmic Riders, featuring Andy Kaufman as the leader of a quirky congregation planning on being picked up by a spaceship. They all killed themselves at the end, I swear to God, smiling as they drank poison, all set to the song Land Down Under. While the credits rolled, you could see them dancing around on a cloud with stars zipping by in the background, but it was wrong and frightening. Their white robes had vomit stains, their smiling, laughing faces looked pale, and the eyes looked dead. It was a comedy about the Heaven's Gate cult, produced more than 15 years before it happened. I started to cry then, feeling hot tears spilling over my numb face. There was no record of this movie anywhere online either. I started grabbing open tapes at random, fast-forwarding through them in morbid fascination. I could identify the events they'd predicted by the box art, but I had to see it. See it to believe it, though I had no idea what to believe, really. This is what I saw. A teen comedy called High School Massacre, in which Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, clothed in black trench coats, shoot up their classmates. The effects were disturbingly realistic, and I stopped the movie after seeing a young Winona Ryder get shot in the chest, pausing it right as she flew backwards, her eyes wide and her chest a gaping red hole like a second shocked mouth, about to spill out a horrible secret. There was another comedy called Bronco Run, in which Billy D. Williams is a retired football player who brutally kills his wife and her lover on screen, stabbing them over and over while laughing maniacally, before leading the law on a madcap hijinks-filled race across L.A. There were more thrillers, fictional reenactments, pre-enactments, I guess, of events that shocked the nation and the world, set to nostalgic soundtracks, featuring familiar, impossibly young faces, faking emotions that would become horribly real in 20 years or so. The impossible movies predicted a horribly real future. I watched or forwarded through all the open thrillers, late into the night, laughing, perhaps hysterically, crying, trying to research them online on my phone, finding nothing, no record that they had been made, no sign that they existed. It was just me, this box, these movies, and a flickering screen, suddenly cut adrift from the sane and familiar world. Those were the open movies. The remaining movies, still sealed, leaned towards science fiction, all featuring apocalyptic wastelands and starfaring citizens. But there were two unopened movies that were the exception. They looked like political thrillers. One is a comedy called Small Hands. It's a black and white movie directed by Stanley Kubrick, about a stolen election and a nuke-obsessed president suffering from dementia, played by John Lithgow, in an obvious toupee. On the back of the box art, it has a view from space, of mushroom clouds blossoming across the globe. Reviews on the box call it a hilariously dark vision of the future. The other looks like a crime thriller. It's called The American's Last Hope, starring Clint Eastwood, as a formerly retired special agent tasked with bringing down a corrupt administration. On the box cover, looming over Clint, is John Lithgow's glowering face in the clouds, his glaring brow overhung by the same ridiculous toupee he's wearing in Small Hands. Reviews on the back of the box call it a bold vision of the future and a triumph of justice over corruption. Neither box has been opened, and on both the factory seal is unbroken. I don't know how this works. I don't know what to do. Does the fact that the movies exist mean these things have to happen? Does watching the movies make the future events occur? The unopened sci-fi movies in the cardboard box hint at wildly different futures. Are these two movies in my hands the different paths before us? Will watching one negate the other? I've been sitting here for hours and the sun has risen and is shining through the blinds, scattering bars of light across the half-watched tapes and open boxes. The VHS player is waiting, its tape slot a gaping mouth, waiting to be fed, waiting for the future, just like the rest of us.